Detective Ryan Cole had been a cop for 12 years, and in all that time, he'd learned to trust his instincts. Right now, those instincts were telling him that the woman walking through the courthouse entrance was the key to solving his case. He'd been chasing answers for 3 weeks, making phone calls that went straight to voicemail, sending emails that never got responses, and watching leads go cold while time slipped away. The woman wore a simple gray suit, nothing fancy, nothing that screamed wealth or power. She carried a leather briefcase in one hand and had her phone pressed to her ear with the other. She looked like any other lawyer or professional who passed through these courthouse doors every single day. But Ryan knew better. He'd seen her name pop up in witness statements, heard her mentioned in depositions, and found her connected to the property where everything had gone wrong. The courthouse was busy that morning, filled with the usual chaos of people trying to find their courtrooms, lawyers huddling with nervous clients and security guards checking bags and directing traffic. Ryan positioned himself near the metal detectors, waiting. He watched as the woman ended her phone call, dropped her phone into a plastic bin, and walked through the scanner. No alarms. She collected her things on the other side and headed straight for the elevators. This was it. This was his chance. If she got into that elevator and disappeared into the maze of courtrooms and offices upstairs, he might lose her for another 3 weeks. Ryan moved quickly, his long strides eating up the distance between them. He reached the elevator bank just as she pressed the up button, and he stepped directly into her path, blocking her way forward. "Ms. Chen, we need to talk," Ryan said, his voice firm and official. He didn't reach for his badge yet, but he stood in a way that made it clear he wasn't asking permission. The woman stopped and looked up at him. Her expression didn't change much, just a slight tightening around her eyes that suggested annoyance rather than fear. That reaction alone should have told Ryan something, but he was too focused on finally getting answers to notice the warning signs. "Excuse me," she said calmly. "I'm Detective Cole," Ryan continued, now pulling his badge from his belt and holding it where she could see it clearly. "You've been avoiding my calls for 3 weeks. I need to ask you some questions about the incident at the Riverside property. 2 people were hurt, and your name keeps coming up in my investigation." Around them, other people in the courthouse hallway started to slow down. A few stopped walking entirely, their attention caught by the confrontation unfolding near the elevators. An older man in a suit paused mid-conversation with his colleague. A young woman with an armful of file folders stood frozen, watching. Ryan was aware of the audience, but he didn't care. He'd cornered plenty of witnesses and suspects in public places before. Sometimes you had to make people uncomfortable to get them to tell the truth. The woman in the gray suit shifted her briefcase to her other hand. "Detective Cole," she said, and her voice had an edge to it now, sharp and controlled. "I understand you have questions, but this is not the appropriate time or place for this conversation." "You've had 3 weeks to make it appropriate," Ryan shot back. 3 weeks of dodged calls and ignored messages. "I've got victims waiting for justice, and you're one of the few people who was at that property when everything went down. So no, I'm not waiting anymore. We're going to talk right here, right now, or I'm going to start asking much harder questions about why you're running." The woman's jaw tightened, and for a moment Ryan thought he saw something like anger flash across her face. But she kept her composure, which only made him more suspicious. Innocent people usually got defensive or scared when cornered by a detective. This woman just looked irritated, like he was wasting her time. Before the situation could escalate further, a courthouse bailiff noticed the confrontation and walked over quickly. The bailiff was a thick-shouldered man in his 50s named Patterson, someone Ryan had worked with on dozens of cases over the years. Patterson glanced at the woman, then at Ryan, and confusion spread across his face. "Detective Cole," Patterson said carefully, his hand moving to his radio. "What's going on here?" "I'm conducting an investigation," Ryan explained, gesturing toward the woman. "This witness has been avoiding questioning, and I need answers about her involvement in the Riverside assault case." Patterson's eyebrows shot up. He looked at the woman again, and this time something like alarm crossed his features. "Detective, you need to step back," Patterson said, his voice low and urgent. "Right now." Ryan felt a spike of frustration. "Patterson, I'm in the middle of something here. This woman, I know who she is," Patterson interrupted, and there was something in his tone that finally made Ryan pause. The bailiff positioned himself slightly between Ryan and the woman, a protective stance that made no sense unless something was very wrong. The woman finally spoke again, and this time her voice carried a weight of authority that hadn't been there before. "Detective Cole, I have not been avoiding your investigation. I have been trying to correct a mistake in your department's paperwork for the past 3 weeks." She reached into her briefcase and pulled out a credential holder, flipping it open so Ryan could see the identification card inside. Ryan's eyes focused on the card, and he felt his stomach drop like he'd just stepped into an empty elevator shaft. The seal was official. The photograph matched the woman in front of him, and the title printed beneath her name made his blood run cold. She wasn't a witness. She wasn't a person of interest. She wasn't someone trying to avoid questioning. She was a judge. The woman continued, her tone now completely professional and absolutely cold. "The Riverside property you're investigating belongs to my sister. We have different last names, which is apparently why your department has been trying to contact me instead of her. I've left multiple messages with your office explaining this error, but clearly, those messages never reached you." Ryan's mind raced, trying to process what he was hearing. His sister's property, different last names, multiple messages, error. The word bounced around in his head like a bullet ricocheting in a small room. He'd spent 3 weeks building a theory, following what he thought was a lead, convinced that this woman's silence meant guilt or knowledge of something important. And the entire time he'd been chasing the wrong person. "Your office was supposed to send updated witness lists," the woman continued, checking her watch. "The correct witness is my sister, Amanda Martinez. She's been waiting for your call. Meanwhile, I've been preparing for a trial that starts in 5 minutes, which is where I'm headed right now unless you plan to continue blocking my path to my own courtroom." Her own courtroom. The words hit Ryan like a physical blow. She wasn't just any judge. She was about to preside over a case right now, and he'd just confronted her in a public hallway, accused her of avoiding an investigation, and essentially treated her like a suspect trying to flee justice. Patterson, the bailiff, gave Ryan a look that clearly said, "I tried to warn you," and gestured for the woman to proceed. She adjusted her briefcase, straightened her jacket, and walked past Ryan without another word. Her heels clicked against the marble floor with a rhythm that sounded to Ryan's ears like the ticking of a countdown to the end of his career. He stood there, frozen, as other courthouse employees who had witnessed the confrontation began to whisper among themselves. Some tried to hide their smiles. Others just stared at him with a mixture of pity and disbelief. Ryan had made mistakes before in his 12 years as a detective, but nothing, absolutely nothing, came close to this. The elevator doors opened, and the judge stepped inside. She pressed a button, and just before the doors closed, she looked directly at Ryan one more time. Her expression wasn't angry anymore. It was worse than that. It was disappointed, like a teacher looking at a student who had failed the easiest test of the year. The elevator doors closed, and she was gone. Ryan stood in the courthouse hallway for what felt like an eternity, but was probably only 30 seconds. His mind was spinning, trying to piece together how everything had gone so spectacularly wrong. The whispers around him grew louder, and he could feel the eyes of courthouse staff boring into his back. Someone behind him let out a low whistle. "The kind you make when you see someone do something monumentally stupid." "Detective Cole," Patterson the bailiff said quietly, stepping closer. "You might want to clear out of this hallway before the morning rush really gets going." "Trust me on this." Ryan nodded numbly and forced his legs to move. He walked toward the main entrance, needing air, needing space, needing to think. But before he could reach the doors, he heard a voice calling his name. It was his partner, Detective Lisa Morgan. And from the look on her face, she already knew exactly what had happened. "Please," Lisa said as she reached him, her voice barely above a whisper. "Please tell me you didn't just confront Judge Chen in front of half the courthouse." "You knew?" Ryan asked, and his voice came out rougher than he intended. "You knew she was a judge?" Lisa pulled out her phone and started scrolling through her emails with urgent swipes. The memo came through from the captain this morning at 7. Judge Victoria Chen, newly AP, appointed to the Superior Court, presiding over the Peterson embezzlement trial starting today. She found the email and turned the screen toward Ryan. Her sister is Amanda Martinez, our actual witness in the Riverside case. They have different last names because Amanda kept her married name after her divorce. Ryan stared at the email, reading words that should have reached him hours ago but hadn't, because he'd been so focused on getting to the courthouse early, so determined to finally corner the woman he thought was avoiding him. He'd left his phone in the car, wanting to stay sharp and focused. That decision now felt like the worst choice he'd made in his entire career. "I tried calling you," Lisa continued, pocketing her phone. "4 times. You didn't answer." "Where's your phone?" "In the car," Ryan admitted. "I didn't want any distractions." Lisa closed her eyes and took a deep breath, the kind you take when you're trying very hard not to say something you'll regret. When she opened them again, her expression was a mix of sympathy and frustration. "Ryan, how bad was it? What exactly did you say to her?" Ryan ran a hand through his hair, replaying the conversation in his mind. Every word he'd spoken now felt like another nail in his professional coffin. "I told her she'd been avoiding my investigation. I said she was running. I blocked her path to the elevator and basically accused her of dodging questions about the assault." He paused, feeling sick. "I did this in front of about 20 people, Lisa, maybe more." "Okay," Lisa said, shifting into problem-solving mode. "Okay, we need to do damage control. First thing, we need to call Captain Rodriguez and explain what happened before someone else does. Second, we need to figure out how this communication breakdown happened in the first place. And third, you need to prepare for what comes next. Because this isn't just going to disappear." Meanwhile, 4 floors above them, Judge Victoria Chen walked into courtroom 4B with her head held high and her emotions locked down tight. She'd spent 15 years working toward this position, grinding through law school while working 2 jobs, putting in brutal hours at corporate law firms, and finally earning the respect and connections needed to be appointed to the bench. She was only 3 weeks into her new role, still learning the rhythms and responsibilities of being a judge, and she refused to let one detective's incompetence shake her confidence. The courtroom was packed. The Peterson embezzlement case had attracted serious media attention because the defendant, Robert Peterson, was a wealthy businessman accused of stealing millions from his own company's pension fund. The victims were ordinary working people who'd trusted their employer with their retirement savings. The lawyers on both sides were top tier, the kind who charged $1,000 an hour and never lost their composure. Camera crews waited outside, forbidden from entering but ready to pounce on anyone who emerged with news. "All rise," the bailiff announced as Victoria entered. Everyone in the courtroom stood, and Victoria felt the weight of their attention. She took her seat behind the bench, the elevated position giving her a clear view of the entire room. The prosecutor's table was on her left, 2 attorneys in sharp suits with stacks of files and laptops open in front of them. The defense table on her right held 3 lawyers, all expensive haircuts and confident postures, surrounding their client who looked remarkably calm for a man facing serious prison time. "Please be seated," Victoria said, her voice clear and steady. She opened the case file in front of her, forcing herself to focus completely on the task at hand. The confrontation in the hallway tried to push its way into her thoughts, but she shoved it aside. There would be time to deal with Detective Cole later. Right now she had a job to do. "We are here for the trial of the people versus Robert Peterson," Victoria continued. "The defendant is charged with embezzlement, wire fraud, and conspiracy to commit fraud. Counsel, please state your appearances for the record." The lead prosecutor stood first, a woman in her 40s named Diana Wells, who had a reputation for being thorough and relentless. "Diana Wells and Thomas Park for the people, Your Honor." The defense attorney rose next, an older man with silver hair and an expensive watch. "Gregory Hammond, Jennifer Liu, and Charles Brennan for the defendant, Your Honor." "Thank you," Victoria said. "Are both sides ready to proceed with opening statements?" "Yes, Your Honor," both attorneys said in unison. Victoria nodded toward the prosecutor. "Ms. Wells, you may begin." Diana Wells walked to the center of the courtroom, positioning herself where both the judge and the jury could see her clearly. The jury box held 12 people who'd been selected over the past 2 days, a mix of ages and backgrounds, all of them trying to look attentive despite the early hour. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," Wells began, "this case is about trust. It's about what happens when the person you trust most, your employer, the person who promises to safeguard your future, betrays that trust in the most calculated way possible. The evidence will show that Robert Peterson didn't just make bad business decisions. He didn't just fail to manage money properly. He deliberately and systematically stole from the people who worked for him, people who spent decades building their careers and counting on their pensions to support them in retirement." Victoria listened carefully, watching the jury's reactions, making mental notes about the arguments being presented. This was what she'd trained for, what she'd dreamed about during those endless nights of studying case law and writing briefs. The law wasn't just abstract theory in textbooks. It was real people with real problems seeking real justice. Wells continued her opening statement, outlining how Peterson had set up shell companies, transferred funds to offshore accounts, and created fake investments to hide the theft. She promised to show paper trails, emails, and testimony from witnesses who'd watched it happen and been too afraid to speak up until now. When Wells finished, Gregory Hammond stood for the defense. His approach was smooth and practiced, his voice warm and reasonable. "Your Honor, members of the jury, my client is a businessman who made investments that didn't work out. That's not a crime. Risk is part of business. Sometimes you win, sometimes you lose. The prosecution wants you to believe that every failed investment is evidence of criminal intent. But the evidence will show something very different. It will show a man who believed in his vision, who tried to grow the company, and who is now being scapegoated because some investments went bad." Victoria maintained her neutral expression, though internally she was already forming questions about the evidence both sides would present. The opening statements were just previews, but they told her what to expect in the coming days. As the morning session progressed, Victoria felt herself settling into the rhythm of the trial. She ruled on objections, asked clarifying questions when legal points needed elaboration, and kept both sides moving at an appropriate pace. The confrontation with Detective Cole began to feel more distant, like something that had happened to someone else. But during the lunch recess, when Victoria retreated to her chambers, reality came crashing back. Her clerk, David, knocked on her door with an expression that told her the morning's incident hadn't been forgotten. "Judge Chen," David said carefully, "Detective Cole has submitted a formal request to speak with you. He's been waiting in the courthouse offices for the past hour, and his captain, Captain Rodriguez, called to apologize and request a meeting to discuss what happened." Victoria removed her reading glasses and set them on her desk. The confrontation had been embarrassing and unprofessional, but what bothered her most was what it suggested about Detective Cole's investigative methods. If he could make such a fundamental mistake about witness identification, if he could spend 3 weeks pursuing the wrong person without double-checking basic facts, what did that say about the quality of his other cases? How many other people had been caught in the crosshairs of his sloppy work? She thought about the victims in the Riverside assault case, Amanda's case, the case where her sister had actually been the one who witnessed the attack. How long had they been waiting for justice while Detective Cole chased shadows and ignored the messages trying to correct his mistake? Schedule a meeting with Captain Rodriguez, Victoria decided, tomorrow morning before court. As for Detective Cole, tell him any communication needs to go through official channels. And David, I need you to pull everything you can find on the Riverside assault case. I want to know what else might be wrong with that investigation. The Peterson trial continued through the afternoon, and Victoria found herself getting absorbed in the complexity of the financial crimes being laid out before her. The prosecution called their first witness, a forensic accountant named Dr. Helen Bradshaw, who walked the jury through spreadsheets and bank statements that showed money moving in ways it shouldn't have moved. Numbers that should have stayed in pension accounts somehow ended up in shell companies with names like Riverside Investments, LLC, and Pacific Growth Partners. The defense attorneys tried to poke holes in the testimony, suggesting that the transactions were legitimate business expenses or investment vehicles. But Dr. Bradshaw held her ground. She'd analyzed thousands of transactions, and her conclusions were clear. Someone had deliberately hidden where the money was going, and that someone had access to the pension fund ACO, aunts that only Robert Peterson controlled. Victoria watched Peterson during the testimony. He sat perfectly still, his expression neutral, occasionally whispering to one of his lawyers. He looked like a man who'd been through tough business meetings before, and wasn't particularly worried about this one. That confidence bothered Victoria more than she wanted to admit. She'd seen plenty of guilty people in her years as a lawyer, and the ones who scared her most were the ones who genuinely believed they'd get away with it. When court adjourned for the day, Victoria gathered her files and returned to her chambers. David had left a stack of documents on her desk, the materials she'd requested about the Riverside assault case. She sat down and started reading, and with each page her concern about Detective Cole's methods grew deeper. The case itself was straightforward. 3 weeks ago, there had been an assault at a riverside property. 2 people had been injured during what appeared to be a home invasion. The property belonged to Amanda Martinez, Victoria's younger sister. Amanda had been home at the time with a friend when 2 men broke in demanding money and valuables. Amanda's friend had fought back, which led to the injuries, and the suspects had fled before police arrived. Amanda had given a statement immediately. She described the attackers, provided details about what they'd taken, and mentioned that she thought one of them might have been someone who'd done construction work on the house months earlier. It was solid witness testimony, the kind that could help identify suspects and build a case. But somehow Detective Cole had gotten Victoria's name mixed up with Amanda's in his files. The paperwork showed multiple errors. Someone had written V. Chen instead of A. Martinez on a witness contact sheet. Another document listed the property owner as Chen, without specifying which Chen. And then there were notes in Detective Cole's handwriting that said, Judge Chen, uncooperative, not returning calls, possible involvement. Victoria felt anger rising in her chest as she read those words. Her own sister had been the victim of a crime, had cooperated fully with the investigation, and Detective Cole had somehow twisted that into Victoria being uncooperative and possibly involved in something criminal. She kept reading. There were messages from the courthouse administration, 3 of them, all sent in the past 2 weeks, explaining that Victoria Chen was a newly appointed judge and that Detective Cole needed to contact Amanda Martinez instead. Those messages had been sent to the detective division. They should have reached Cole. Someone had dropped the ball, whether it was Cole himself or someone else in his chain of command. But what concerned Victoria most was a note dated 1 week ago where Detective Cole had written that he planned to intercept subject at courthouse, use public pressure to force cooperation. He'd actually planned the confrontation. It wasn't a spur-of-the-moment mistake. He'd strategized about cornering her in public, believing that embarrassing her would make her talk. Victoria closed the file and sat back in her chair. This wasn't just about one detective making one mistake. This was about a pattern of poor judgment, incomplete investigation, and a willingness to pressure people without having all the facts. She thought about all the cases that came through her courtroom, all the arrests and charges that relied on detective work. How many other cases had this kind of sloppiness in them? Her phone buzzed. It was a text from Amanda. Hey sis, did a detective finally contact you? I've been waiting for them to call me back about the Riverside case. They said they had questions but never followed up. Victoria stared at the message. So Amanda didn't even know what had happened. She didn't know that Detective Cole had spent 3 weeks chasing the wrong person, while the actual case went nowhere. Victoria typed back, I'll explain everything tonight. Are you free for dinner? Always free for you. Is everything okay? It will be. See you at 7. Victoria put down her phone and made a decision. She wasn't going to let this slide. Not because she wanted revenge or needed to prove something, but because justice required better than what Detective Cole had demonstrated. If she stayed silent about this, she'd be enabling the same sloppy work that could hurt other victims in other cases. Meanwhile, across town at the police station, Ryan sat in Captain Rodriguez's office feeling like he was back in high school getting called to the principal's office. The captain was a serious man in his late 50s, with gray hair and the kind of face that had seen too many bad days to be easily shocked. But even he looked disturbed by what he'd learned about the courthouse incident. Walk me through it, Captain Rodriguez said, leaning back in his chair. From the beginning, how did we end up with you confronting a sitting judge? Ryan explained everything. The initial witness report that had the wrong name, the property records that listed Chen without a first name, the phone calls that went to the wrong number, the messages he never received because he'd been out doing field work, the growing frustration as weeks passed with no contact from someone he believed was a key witness, and finally his decision to intercept her at the courthouse. And at no point, the captain said slowly, did you think to verify the identity? To check if this V. Chen was the same person as the property owner? To ask literally anyone if you had the right contact information? I thought I did, Ryan said, and the words sounded weak even to his own ears. The address matched. The timeline matched. I thought she was avoiding me because she knew something. Lisa, who'd been sitting quietly in the corner, spoke up. Captain, some of this is on the system. The initial report had errors. and the correction emails got lost in the shuffle. Ryan made mistakes, but he wasn't working with complete information either. The captain held up a hand. I'm not looking to throw anyone under the bus here. What I'm looking for is understanding how this happened so we can prevent it from happening again. He turned back to Ryan. But here's what concerns me, Detective. You didn't just have the wrong name. You made assumptions about someone's behavior based on incomplete information, and then you plan to publicly confront them. That's not investigation. That's intimidation. The words hit Ryan hard because they were true. He'd written in his notes that he planned to use public pressure at the courthouse. At the time, it had seemed like a reasonable tactic. Now it looked like exactly what it was. A power play by someone who'd gotten frustrated and decided to force the issue instead of doing the actual work of investigating properly. Judge Chen has requested a meeting, Captain Rodriguez continued. Tomorrow morning at 8. I'll be there, you'll be there, and you're going to apologize in a way that actually means something. Not just sorry for the confusion, but a real acknowledgement that you messed up. Understood? Yes, sir, Ryan said. And after that meeting, you're going to go back to the Riverside case and actually solve it. The right way this time. Find Amanda Martinez, get her full statement, follow the leads she provides, and close this case properly. Those victims deserve better than what they've gotten so far. Ryan nodded, feeling the full weight of his failure settling on his shoulders. 2 people had been hurt in a home invasion 3 weeks ago, and instead of focusing on finding their attackers, he'd wasted time chasing the wrong person and creating a new problem instead of solving the original one. Lisa drove Ryan home that evening, neither of them saying much during the ride. When she pulled up to his apartment building, she finally broke the silence. You know what the worst part of this is? She said. It's not that you made a mistake. Everyone makes mistakes. It's that you stopped checking your work. You got so convinced you were right that you didn't question whether you might be wrong. Ryan sat in the passenger seat, staring at the dashboard. I thought I was being thorough. I thought I was being persistent. There's a difference between persistent and stubborn, Lisa said. Persistent means you keep working until you find the truth. Stubborn means you keep working until reality matches what you already decided was true. She looked at him directly. Tomorrow, when you meet with Judge Chen, you need to understand that this isn't just about you embarrassing yourself. It's about the fact that real victims in a real case have been waiting for real justice while you chased shadows. Ryan got out of the car and watched Lisa drive away. He went up to his apartment, but he didn't turn on the lights or the TV. He just sat in the darkness, thinking about everything that had gone wrong and trying to figure out how to make it right. Tomorrow would be one of the hardest days of his career, but it was a day he'd earned through his own poor choices. And somewhere across the city, Victoria was having dinner with her sister Amanda, explaining what had happened and why the Riverside case had stalled for 3 weeks. Amanda listened with growing disbelief, unable to understand how something so simple had gotten so confused. So he thought you were me, Amanda asked. And he never checked? He never checked, Victoria confirmed. And tomorrow we're going to have a conversation about what happens next. Ryan didn't sleep much that night. He kept rehearsing what he'd say to Judge Chen, trying to find words that would convey genuine remorse without sounding like he was just trying to save his career. Every version he came up with felt hollow or defensive or like he was making excuses. By the time his alarm went off at 6 in the morning, he'd maybe gotten 2 hours of actual sleep, and it hadn't been restful. He arrived at the courthouse at 7:30, wearing his best suit and carrying a folder with all the corrected case files. Captain Rodriguez was already there, standing in the hallway outside the conference room where the meeting would take place. The captain took one look at Ryan's face and shook his head. You look terrible, Rodriguez said bluntly. Didn't sleep much, Ryan admitted. Good, the captain said. You shouldn't sleep well after something like this. The day you can mess up this badly and sleep like a baby is the day you need to turn in your badge. He checked his watch. Judge Chen should be here any minute. Remember what we talked about. No excuses, no deflecting blame, just own what you did and explain how you're going to fix it. At exactly 8 o'clock, Judge Victoria Chen walked into the conference room. She wore a navy blue suit and carried herself with the same composed dignity Ryan had seen in the courthouse hallway. But this time there was something else in her expression. Not anger exactly, but a kind of determined seriousness that made Ryan feel like he was about to face the toughest judge in the entire state. Captain Rodriguez. Detective Cole, Victoria said, nodding to each of them as she took a seat at the conference table. Thank you for making time for this meeting. They all sat down, and for a moment nobody spoke. The silence stretched out uncomfortable and heavy, until Ryan realized that Victoria was waiting for him to go first. This was his mess to address. "Judge Chen," Ryan began, and his voice sounded rougher than he intended. "I want to start by apologizing for what happened yesterday. There's no excuse for how I approached you. I made assumptions based on incomplete information, and I let my frustration override proper procedure and basic common sense. I was wrong, and I'm deeply sorry for the embarrassment and disrespect I showed you." Victoria listened without interrupting, her expression neutral. When Ryan paused, she said simply, "Continue." Ryan swallowed hard. "After reviewing the case files properly, I understand now that the witness I should have been contacting is your sister, Amanda Martinez. The errors in our initial paperwork led me to pursue the wrong person, and instead of verifying the information, I just assumed I was right. I wasted 3 weeks on a mistake that I should have caught in 3 minutes. And the note in your file," Victoria said, her voice measured and calm, "about using public pressure to force cooperation. Tell me about that." Ryan felt his face flush. He'd hoped that particular detail wouldn't come up, but of course it had. Victoria Chen was a judge. She'd read every word of the case file. "That was wrong," he said. "I was frustrated that I couldn't get answers, and I thought confronting you in a public place would make you more likely to talk. I see now that it was an intimidation tactic, not an investigation technique. It was completely inappropriate." Captain Rodriguez spoke up for the first time. "Judge Chen, I want to assure you that we've conducted an internal review of how this happened. The initial witness identification error should have been caught by multiple people in our chain of command. The correction messages that were sent to our office should have reached Detective Cole immediately. We've identified failures at several levels, and we're implementing new procedures to prevent this from happening again." Victoria nodded slowly, taking this in. Then she opened her own folder and pulled out several pages. "I appreciate the apology and the acknowledgement of responsibility. But I want to talk about something that concerns me more than the personal embarrassment I experienced yesterday." She spread the pages on the table. Ryan recognized them as documents from the Riverside assault case. "2 people were injured in a home invasion 3 weeks ago," Victoria continued. "My sister Amanda was one of the victims. She gave a detailed statement to officers on the scene. She described the attackers, provided information about their possible identities, and has been waiting for follow-up from your investigation. Instead of receiving that follow-up, she's heard nothing for 3 weeks while Detective Cole pursued the wrong person." The words landed like punches, each one hitting harder than the last. Ryan had been so focused on his own mistake, on the embarrassment of confronting a judge, that he hadn't fully considered what his error had meant for the actual victims of the actual crime. "Where is that investigation now?" Victoria asked, looking directly at Ryan. Ryan opened his folder and pulled out his notes, the ones he'd compiled after finally talking to the right people yesterday afternoon. "I spoke with your sister late yesterday," he said. "She provided additional details about the suspects, including the fact that she believes one of them was a contractor who'd worked on her house about 4 months ago. She gave me his name and the name of the company he worked for. I've already started running background checks and tracking down current addresses. So the investigation is 3 weeks behind where it should be," Victoria said. "It wasn't a question." "Yes," Ryan admitted. "And that's entirely my fault." Victoria leaned back in her chair, her expression thoughtful. "Detective Cole, I've spent the past 15 years working in law, and I've seen a lot of police work during that time. Some of it excellent, some of it adequate, and some of it problematic. What concerns me about your approach isn't just that you made an identification error. It's that you demonstrated a pattern of jumping to conclusions and using pressure tactics instead of thorough investigation." She paused, letting that sink in. "How many other cases have you worked where you decided what the answer was before you had all the facts? How many other witnesses or suspects have you pressured based on incomplete information? Because if this is how you normally operate, then we have a much bigger problem than one embarrassing confrontation." Ryan wanted to defend himself, to say that this was unusual, that he normally did better work. But the honest truth was that he'd been taking shortcuts lately. Too many cases, too little time, too much pressure to close files and move on to the next one. He'd started trusting his gut more than the evidence, started pushing harder instead of investigating smarter. "I don't have a good answer for that," Ryan said quietly. I can tell you that this was my wake-up call. I can tell you that I'm going to do better. But I understand if that's not enough for you." Victoria looked at Captain Rodriguez. "What consequences is Detective Cole facing?" The captain didn't hesitate. Formal reprimand in his personnel file. Mandatory retraining on investigation procedures and witness protocols. And he's on probation for the next 6 months. Any similar issues during that time, and he's looking at suspension or termination. And the Riverside case? Victoria asked. "It's his top priority," Rodriguez said. "He works nothing else until those suspects are identified and arrested. I've also assigned Detective Morgan as oversight to ensure everything is done by the book." Victoria considered this for a long moment. Ryan could see her weighing options, deciding what justice looked like in this situation. Finally, she spoke. "I want weekly updates on the Riverside investigation. Not from Detective Cole, but from Detective Morgan. I want to know that this case is being handled properly and that my sister gets the justice she deserves." "You'll have them," Rodriguez promised. Victoria gathered her papers and stood up. "Detective Cole, I'm accepting your apology, but I want you to understand something. The badge you carry gives you power, real power over people's lives. You can help them or hurt them, sometimes just by doing your job poorly. Yesterday you used that power carelessly. The victims in the Riverside case have been hurt twice now. Once by the criminals who attacked them, and once by the system that was supposed to help them but failed because you couldn't be bothered to check your facts." The words stung because they were absolutely true. Ryan stood as well, meeting her eyes. "I understand, Judge Chen, and I promise you I'm going to find the people who hurt your sister and her friend. I'm going to do it right this time." Victoria nodded once, then turned to Captain Rodriguez. "I have court in an hour. Thank you for taking this seriously, Captain. I hope the changes you're implementing will prevent other people from experiencing what happened to me and my sister." She left the conference room, her footsteps echoing down the hallway. Ryan and Captain Rodriguez stood in silence for a moment after she was gone. "That," the captain said finally, "is what accountability looks like. She could have demanded your badge. She could have filed formal complaints that would have ended your career. Instead, she's giving you a chance to make it right. Don't waste it." Ryan nodded, feeling the full weight of that second chance settling on his shoulders. He had work to do. Real work. And he couldn't afford to mess it up again. Later that morning, Victoria sat in her chambers preparing for the second day of the Peterson trial. The meeting with Detective Cole had been difficult but necessary. She believed in second chances, but she also believed in consequences. Cole would either learn from this and become a better detective, or he'd prove that he wasn't cut out for the job. Time would tell. Her phone buzzed with a text from Amanda. "Detective Morgan called me this morning. She seems really thorough and professional. Thanks for whatever you did, sis." Victoria smiled slightly and texted back. "Just made sure the right people were paying attention. Justice works better when everyone does their job properly." The Peterson trial continued for 3 more days, and Victoria found herself impressed by the prosecution's case, despite her requirement to remain neutral. The evidence was overwhelming. Bank records showed a clear pattern of theft. Emails revealed that Robert Peterson had knowingly created fake investment accounts to hide where the pension money was going. And on the 3rd day, a former accountant named Kevin Walsh took the stand and provided testimony that sealed Peterson's fate. Walsh had worked for Peterson's company for 6 years before resigning 8 months ago. He sat in the witness box looking nervous but determined, his hands clasped tightly in his lap as the prosecutor questioned him. "Mr. Walsh," Diana Wells asked, "can you tell the jury why you resigned from your position?" Walsh took a breath. "I resigned because Mr. Peterson asked me to falsify financial records. He wanted me to make it look like the pension fund investments were performing well, when they actually didn't exist. When I told him I couldn't do that, he said I either needed to get on board or get out. So I got out." "Did you report this to anyone?" Wells asked. "I tried," Walsh said. "I went to the board of directors, but most of them were Peterson's friends or business partners. They told me I must have misunderstood something. After that, I knew I couldn't stay, so I resigned. I've been looking for another job ever since. And it's been hard because Peterson made sure word got around that I was difficult to work with." The defense attorneys tried to discredit Walsh during cross-examination, suggesting he was bitter about being pushed out and was making up stories for revenge. But Walsh held firm. He had copies of emails, documentation of the meetings where Peterson had asked him to falsify records, and even a recording he'd made on his phone when Peterson had threatened him for refusing to cooperate. When the jury returned after 3 hours of deliberation, their verdict was unanimous. Guilty on all counts. Victoria watched Robert Peterson's face as the verdict was read. For the first time since the trial began, his confidence cracked. His shoulders sagged, and he had to grip the table in front of him to steady himself. Sentencing was scheduled for 2 weeks later, which gave Victoria time to review all the victim impact statements and sentencing guidelines. When that day came, the courtroom was packed again, this time with employees whose retirements had been destroyed by Peterson's greed. One by one, they stood and told their stories. A woman in her 60s who'd worked as a secretary for 30 years and now couldn't afford to retire. A man who'd been diagnosed with cancer and couldn't pay for treatment because his pension was gone. A couple who'd planned to travel after retirement, but were now working part-time jobs at 70 years old just to cover basic expenses. Victoria listened to every statement, taking notes, seeing the real human cost of Peterson's crimes. When it was time to announce the sentence, she spoke directly to Peterson. "Mr. Peterson, you were in a position of trust. Hundreds of people worked for you, believed in you, and trusted you to protect their futures. You violated that trust in the most calculated way possible, not because you needed the money, but because you wanted more than you already had. The law provides guidelines for sentencing in cases like this, and I've considered all the factors involved. You are sentenced to 15 years in federal prison, and you are ordered to pay full restitution to all victims, even if it means liquidating every asset you own." Peterson's lawyers immediately filed notice of appeal, as expected, but Victoria knew the verdict would stand. The evidence was too strong, the case too well prosecuted. Justice had been served. That same week, Ryan Cole was working the longest hours of his career on the Riverside assault case. With Lisa Morgan providing oversight and catching any mistakes before they became problems, he'd tracked down the contractor Amanda had mentioned. The man's name was Tony Fletcher, and he had a criminal record for theft and assault going back 10 years. Fletcher had worked on Amanda's house 4 months earlier as part of a renovation crew. He'd had access to the entire property, would have known the layout, and would have seen enough to know that Amanda and her friend might have valuables worth stealing. Ryan and Lisa brought him in for questioning, and after 6 hours of careful, methodical interrogation, Fletcher broke down and admitted to the home invasion. He also gave up his accomplice, a man named Derek Hughes, who'd been with him that night. Both men were arrested and charged with home invasion, assault, and robbery. The evidence was solid this time, built carefully with no shortcuts, no assumptions, just thorough detective work. Ryan wrote his reports with more attention to detail than he'd used in years, double-checking every fact, verifying every statement. When the arrests were made, Lisa called Amanda to let her know. Amanda immediately called Victoria, who was in her chambers reviewing case files for the following day. "They got them," Amanda said, her voice thick with emotion. "They actually got them. Detective Morgan just called and said both men are in custody and confessed to everything." Victoria felt relief wash over her. "I'm glad, Amanda. I'm really glad." Detective Morgan said that Detective Cole has been working nonstop on this case all week. Amanda continued. She said he's been really thorough, really careful. "I know what happened with you was bad, but it seems like maybe he learned something from it." "Maybe he did," Victoria said. "People can change if they want to badly enough." A week later, Victoria received the final update from Lisa Morgan. The report was detailed and professional, outlining every step of the investigation from the corrected witness interviews through the arrests and confessions. At the end, Lisa had included a note. "Judge Chen, I want you to know that Detective Cole has approached this case with complete professionalism and dedication. He's worked harder on this investigation than I've seen him work in the 2 years we've been partners. I'm not making excuses for his earlier mistakes, but I wanted you to know that he took your words seriously and has made real changes in how he approaches his work. The victims in this case received the justice they deserved, and that's largely because Detective Cole was determined to make things right." Victoria filed the report and sat back in her chair. The whole situation had been a mess, but maybe something good had come from it after all. A detective had learned to do better work. Victims had gotten justice, and she'd proven to herself that she could handle the challenges of being a judge. even when those challenges came from unexpected directions. 3 months later, Victoria was working late in her chambers when she received an unusual delivery. It was a letter, handwritten on plain paper with no return address. She opened it carefully and recognized the handwriting from the case files she'd reviewed months earlier. "Judge Chen," the letter began, "I know I've already apologized, but I wanted you to know what's happened since that day in the courthouse. I've worked 15 cases in the past 3 months, and I've approached every single one of them differently than I used to. I check my facts twice. I verify information before I act on it. I remember that every case involves real people who deserve real justice, not just a detective trying to close files quickly." The letter continued. "The Riverside case wasn't the only one where I'd been taking shortcuts. After you pointed that out, I went back and reviewed my closed cases from the past year. I found 3 where I think I might have missed something important because I was in too much of a hurry. I've reopened all 3, and in one of them, I found evidence that points to a different suspect than the one we arrested. That case is being reviewed now, and if we got it wrong, I'm going to fix it." Ryan's letter concluded, "I'm not writing this to make you feel sorry for me or to get back in your good graces. I'm writing because you were right about everything you said. The badge I carry gives me power, and I was using it carelessly. I'm trying to do better now, and I wanted you to know that your words made a difference. The victims in all these cases deserve better than what I was giving them. Thank you for holding me accountable." Victoria read the letter twice, then filed it carefully in her desk drawer. She didn't respond to it, didn't need to. The letter wasn't really asking for anything. It was just a man acknowledging that he'd learned a hard lesson and was trying to be better. That evening, Victoria stopped by Amanda's house for dinner. Her sister was doing well, had started sleeping better now that the men who'd attacked her were behind bars awaiting trial. They sat on the back porch with glasses of wine, watching the sun set over the river. "Do you ever think about that day at the courthouse?" Amanda asked. "When that detective confronted you?" Victoria considered the question. "Sometimes," she admitted, "but mostly I think about what came after. Justice isn't just about one moment or one case. It's about the whole system working the way it's supposed to. And sometimes that means holding people accountable when they mess up so they can learn to do better." "You sound like a judge," Amanda said with a smile. "I am a judge," Victoria replied, returning the smile. "It took me 15 years to get here, and I'm not going to—"